Hey guys, it's Sam and welcome to Caps Lock, a podcast designed to help you live bigger, better, louder, and longer. Before we get started, I just want to thank you guys for listening and for giving this a chance and for coming here in pursuit of your best self. This is a space where we are going to grow together, and my hope is that it helps you go forward confidently, unapologetically, and with purpose. It's time to live your life in Caps Lock. If that mission feels aligned for you, hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and let's dive in. I just want to start off today's episode with a disclaimer that I'm going to sound like a total narc the whole time because I don't know anything about weed. I have smoked maybe 3 or 4 times in my life, maybe 4 or 5, most of which were in high school, and I've always been terrible at it. So please forgive me. I'm going to try not to sound like an absolute loser for the next 40-ish minutes, but no promises. As usual, I want to precede the research portion of our episode today by explaining why we're talking about this topic at all. And today we have 2 reasons. Number 1, it was requested by a couple of my followers. I so appreciate this. Shout out to the people who requested it. If anyone listening ever has a topic in mind that you want me to discuss on the show, that you want me to research, please send me a message. It is so important to me that every episode provides you with value, and requesting a topic is not only a great way to give you what you want, but it's also a great way for me to make sure the show is aligned. So thank you for that request. And the second reason we're talking about this today is obviously I stopped drinking like 10 months ago now. I have spent some of that time reflecting on my personal relationship to substances, as well as the health benefits and drawbacks of other substances, both synthetic and natural, particularly ones that are widely used. And marijuana is obviously really high on that list. So let's start with my relationship to marijuana because I am nothing if not an oversharer. And I feel like every time I tell personal stories on the show, I get like 100 DMs being like, same. So I'm going to keep doing it. The first time I ever smoked weed was in high school, and I think it was out of an apple. I was way too scared to do it the right way, where you inhale it all the way down into your lungs. So I kind of just like held it in my mouth and acted high for a few minutes so the boys we were smoking with didn't think I was a loser. And I observed everyone else when they were high. And I feel like that is a very weird thing for a 14-year-old to do. But if you know me, or if you are a regular listener or a social follower, that's not hard to believe. Like, I use this as a science experiment. So I'm observing everyone else, and the goal was really so that I could like act like that a little bit so I wouldn't be outed as like a total narc who wasn't actually smoking. And everyone just seemed pretty chill. Like, they weren't talking that much. They were kind of vegging. They were very relaxed, whatever. And I was like, I could really use some of that. Because if you know me in real life, or even if you just know me from TV or the internet or whatever, no part of me is chill. There is 0% chill inside of my body. I'm a worrier. I'm an overthinker. I'm a planner. I'm a girl boss. I'm an overachiever, a control freak, a people pleaser. I am a million things, and not one of them is a synonym for chill. And seeing what weed did to people I knew, and seeing how it was portrayed on TV and in movies, I was honestly convinced that this was the key to unlocking a version of myself that wasn't all the things I just said. If you've been here a while, you know that one of my defining qualities is too muchness. And the reason I say that in this particular moment is because too muchness is entirely subjective. I never thought I was too much as a kid because nobody had ever told me I was too much. I was talkative and theatrical and friendly and outgoing, but too much is a quality you adopt because someone else assigns it to you. And I first started hearing it in probably high school, and I knew immediately it was a bad thing based on the way people said it. So for a really long time, I dabbled in suppressing my entire personality and being a chill girl. But because that was so incredibly unnatural for me, I literally sucked at it. Like every time I pretended I didn't care or I didn't try at something, I just felt like such a fraud, like such a fake, and it wouldn't last. Like I would inevitably become myself again and just feel embarrassed by how much I was, how quote unquote much, you know. Anyway, I stumbled upon weed for the first time and I felt like it was going to be my secret weapon. Obviously, I couldn't be high all the time. Not only is that just like so against my personality, but it was also just like impossible between school and sports. And if we're being completely real and honest, like my parents would kill me and I can't live like that. But I figured that maybe when it really mattered, like for example, in social situations like parties or late night hangouts with the popular guys, that weed could help me be the chill girl, or, you know, at least for long enough to convince everybody. So after my first fake attempt at smoking weed, I tried it one or two more times the real way. And I genuinely hated it. Like I hated it. My immediate reaction was to become incredibly paranoid. I was convinced that the cops were about to drive by and like arrest me and my friends. We were like 15. Or that I would get suspended from school or get kicked out of my ballet program. And also, because of this paranoia, I was 100% convinced while I was high that I was acting insane and that everybody hated me and thought I was weird. Anyway, as you can probably guess, smoking weed didn't become a habit for me. The next thing I want to say is that this episode is not a hit piece on weed. It's really important to me that I present facts and information to you in a way that tells you the whole story of the subject without bias. So to clarify why we're talking about weed today, besides the fact that a few of you requested it, as I continue to be on this journey of moving away from mind-altering substances, I have found myself reflecting on what they do to me, what they do to other people, how they work, whether there are safe and healthy ways to use them. And weed is a lot more complicated than alcohol, for example. And that is because I genuinely don't believe there are any redeeming qualities to alcohol. And I cannot come up, after doing all the research and hearing all the anecdotes and all of it, I cannot come up with a single redeeming quality. I can't come up with an effective argument as to why it's legal, genuinely. But weed is beloved by some people. It is hated by others. It is prescribed to and prescribed by some people. It is intermittently legalized and criminalized across the country and even the world. There are people who tout its benefits, people who think it's addictive. And to be honest, I am confident that I'm going to get hate on this episode no matter which side I personally land on or what information I present, because people feel very strongly and passionately about it. So despite my personal experiences, I'm going to make a deeply concerted effort to present this information without bias, and I will be exceedingly clear when I am making an opinionated statement versus a factual statement. As usual, do not forget all my sources are linked in the show notes if you want to fact check or even just explore them for yourself. And if you don't mind taking a minute, pausing the show and leaving us a rating or review, it would mean a lot to me. Every time I say this, I get a couple ratings or reviews, and I want you to be honest in the ratings and reviews, but all of you are so nice, and it honestly makes my day, and it makes it possible for me to keep making the show for you. So welcome back if you just paused to write a review, and now we're going to get into it. Back to the basics. What's weed? Cannabis, sometimes referred to as marijuana or weed or any number of street names, refers to dried out leaves, flowers, stems, and seeds of the Cannabis sativa L plant. This plant contains at least 125 and possibly many more. I saw numbers up in the 400s on some sources. Active compounds and constituents, the most abundant and widely known of which is called tetrahydrocannabinol. This is going to be a minute, y'all. Tetrahydrocannabinol, otherwise known as THC or Delta-9. I will refer to this as THC moving forward for the purposes of both brevity and clarity. As we know, THC has intoxicating effects, so it can temporarily alter a person's mood, thoughts, perceptions. More on that later, obviously. Besides THC, another prevalent constituent of cannabis is cannabidiol. I wrote the pronunciations in this outline because we are not going to have another moment where I'm mispronouncing things like we did during the vaping episode. So besides THC, another prevalent constituent of cannabis is cannabidiol, which is a non-intoxicating compound that we know colloquially as CBD. As it is not intoxicating, it does not induce a high like THC. Most CBD is extracted from a specific variety of the cannabis sativa plant known as hemp. The main difference between hemp and other cannabis plants is that hemp has less than 0.3% THC, while other cannabis plants typically have a lot more THC than CBD. Obviously, more on CBD later too. Before we go deep, I do want to call out one thing, which is that marijuana specifically refers to the type of cannabis that contains THC. So the words marijuana and cannabis are used interchangeably a lot, but they are technically not interchangeable. So I'm going to do my best. It's like so ingrained in me to use them interchangeably, but I'm going to do my best to not, and to only use each term how the source I'm referencing uses it. So if that's right or wrong, put it on the source, because I did so much double checking here. Some of you might not know that I'm a bit of a history nerd, but you should have known, since I'm also a bit of a science nerd. But if you knew me in high school, you would never know either one of these things about me, so it's anybody's game at this point. But I think the history of cannabis use is so interesting and just really underscores the change in public sentiment around it over time, which has ultimately led to this great divide of people who love it versus people who hate it. So this next part is what I think is fun and is also like a mini history lesson. So buckle in. I used to be the queen of searching my symptoms on the internet and going down a rabbit hole of terminal illnesses that I definitely didn't have, but would then lie awake worrying about for weeks. As I reinforced that habit time and time again, the line started to blur between when I should or shouldn't take a symptom seriously. I mean, even if your symptoms match up with a diagnosis on the internet, everyone experiences health issues differently. So there's no way to know if you've got the same thing as that girl on TikTok. But now I know that knowledge is power, so I'd rather see a doctor right away to either soothe my unfounded concerns or get the care I need. And that is where ZocDoc comes in. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment. I've used ZocDoc to find all my medical doctors, and it has been a total game changer because I used to have so much trouble finding the overlap between who's a good fit for me, who takes my insurance, and who's available to see me. So take back the power, stop putting off those doctor's appointments, and go to ZocDoc.com/capslock to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/capslock. ZocDoc.com/capslock. According to the official DEA historical archives, the first recorded use of cannabis was by the Chinese Emperor Shen Nung in 2727 BC. It was believed to have healing properties, and it was written in his pharmacopoeia, which I hate that word. It feels like it should be pronounced pharmacopoeia, which I don't believe it is. So, whatever. Anyway, pharmacopoeia is just a fancy word for an official publication of medicinal drugs and their intended uses. So it's a drug list. However, this whole thing is a little wishy-washy to me because most reputable sources, including Britannica, say that this guy was literally mythical, like he's made up. He was born with the body of a bull and the head of a man. He could talk 3 days after he was born. He could walk within a week, and he could plow a field at age 3, I guess, because he had the body of a bull. So do with that what you will. It's, allegedly. Legend has it, he invented the cart and plow, tamed the ox and yoked the horse, and taught his people to clear land with fire, establishing the first stable agricultural society in China. The reason we're talking about him is because he is widely revered as the father of Chinese medicine, having provided great contributions through his meticulous study of herbs, resulting in a catalog of 365 species of medicinal plants, which ultimately became the basis of many later herbological studies. So whether or not you believe in this mythical bull ox man talking at day 1, 3, Emperor Man, this list of drugs existed, and that is the explanation for how they came about. Regardless of whether that guy was real, the Chinese people were not the only people using cannabis. Ancient Greeks and Romans were also on board, as well as the Indian Hindus, Assyrians, and throughout the Middle East, where use spread through the Islamic Empire to North Africa. Now, all of the texts confirming this information reported cannabis to treat a bunch of health problems, including arthritis, depression, inflammation, chronic pain, and more. And some of them reported it being used as an intoxicant, like alcohol, the way, we use them both now. In 1545, cannabis made its way to the West, where it was imported and grown in the form of hemp for use as fiber in products like clothing and paper and rope. This is where I think it starts to get really interesting because it's sort of like the modern evolution of how we use cannabis. In 1841 came this guy named William Brooke O'Shaughnessy. He was an Irishman, doctor of medicine, and fellow of the Royal Society, who is known for the first successful use of IV replacement therapy. He had lived in India for a bit to study chemistry and pharmacology, as well as, somewhat randomly, pioneering the spread of telegraphy, like the use of the telegraph throughout India. So that's cool. Anyway, he is best known nowadays for bringing cannabis to Europe in a medicinal capacity because until then, like I said, it had really only been used as hemp in the West. So about 10 years later, around 1850, America was starting to use cannabis in pharmaceutical applications. And by the 1930s, law enforcement in America was starting to see it being used as an intoxicant. And so they pressured the federal government to ban it, or at least, like in the meantime, to regulate it. The government hesitated at first because the therapeutic benefits of cannabis were still being studied. And also, and let's be so real, probably more convincingly for the American government, the commercial applications of hemp fiber and hemp seeds and hemp oil were bringing in a lot of money to the American industry. But the commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics started doing just a ton of anti-marijuana campaigning. And ultimately, the government just caved under pressure and passed what is called the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. And that basically just regulated the importation. Is that a word? I think it's a word. I don't know why that looks so weird. The cultivation, the possession, and also the distribution of marijuana. After that, there was just this major slowdown in the importation. There it is again. It feels weird, guys. I think it's a word. Of hemp as well. Because, of course, all the different kinds of cannabis got caught up in this legislation, making it just really expensive and difficult to import and to work with. Between the 1940s and the 1960s, there was so much more back and forth, if you can believe it. On the research side, CBD and THC were first extracted and isolated from cannabis, which would go on to obviously be crucial for the industry as a whole. And in 1944, the New York Academy of Medicine issued an extensively researched report, very convincing, declaring that contrary to earlier research and popular belief, marijuana use alone did not induce violence, insanity, or sex crimes, or lead to addiction or other drug use. Also, obviously crucial for the industry as a whole. During World War II, everyone realized that due to the intense regulation of cannabis, there wasn't enough hemp being imported or farmed in the United States, which was a problem because it turns out it was an essential fiber component in military necessities like parachutes. So then the Department of Agriculture winds up campaigning for hemp specifically. And that year, American farmers successfully farmed 375,000 acres of hemp. I think, the pattern we're seeing here is that stuff that brings in money and supports the government's interests, like industry and military, are approved or they want to approve it. And then if it's, and that makes sense. And then if it's, causing crimes, they want to not approve it. it makes sense. I'm just saying it's like a little, you get the gist. Then in 1952 and 1956, the Boggs Act and the Narcotics Control Act set mandatory sentences for drug-related offenses, including marijuana, and a first offense marijuana possession officially started carrying a minimum sentence of 2 to 10 years plus a fine of up to $20,000. But then in the 60s, weed became really popular in the white upper middle class, and there was this big like counterculture movement where people were just loving weed. So in 1970, the federal government introduced the Controlled Substance Act, which is basically just a way to categorize all the drugs that were like they were already regulating so that it was easier for law enforcement to control and fight against substance abuse. And there were 5 classifications of drugs, and the drugs were assigned to their classifications based on their accepted medical use, weighed against their potential for abuse and addiction and, you know, the level of harmfulness. In 1970, when the act was introduced, marijuana was listed as a Schedule I drug, which is the like quote unquote worst classification of drug because according to the government, it had a high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use in the United States. But, so like just to be clear, okay, right? So they set the mandatory sentences. Weed becomes really popular in counterculture. They introduce this act that like identifies drugs within their use and harmfulness. And then they list marijuana as the worst, right? So that's where we're coming up against here. Okay, cool. So now they realize that the mandatory minimum sentences and like fines and punishments they'd established in the 50s for people with possession and use of marijuana were not working to reduce the use of marijuana. Hence this counterculture movement where everyone is smoking weed in the 60s. So at the same time as this Controlled Substance Act in 1970, they repealed the punishments for weed, except in limited and serious circumstances, so that they can focus on rehabilitation instead of punishment for marijuana users. These people cannot make up their minds. It was insane researching this. Like, I had to triple check everything because I was like, there's no way. Like, that makes no sense. Anyway, throughout the 70s, a bunch of states decriminalized marijuana and reduced their penalties for possession and use. But then in 1986, the Federal Anti-Drug Abuse Act increased the penalties again. It's unbelievable. For possession and use of controlled substances as part of the war on drugs, which we've all heard of. In 1996, California became the first state to legalize medical marijuana, which really caused some problems because, right, there's this like very obvious conflict between that and the federal law, which, you know, allowed law enforcement to prosecute anyone who possessed or used marijuana. A decision that was, by the way, upheld by the Supreme Court in 2005. So, like, these laws are not getting, like, federal law and California law in 2005 are not getting any closer to reflecting each other's values. In 2012, though, Colorado and Washington became the first 2 states to legalize recreational marijuana. And then by 2013, Obama had issued the Cole Memo, which generally speaking prevented the federal government from prosecuting for marijuana possession and use in states where it was legalized and regulated. But don't get too comfortable because the Cole Memo was reversed literally 5 years later in 2018. But then on the other side, several states legalized medical and recreational marijuana in the years that followed, basically up until now. I'm dizzy. Today, 24 states have legalized marijuana, and during his presidency, Biden actually moved to reclassify marijuana within the Controlled Substances Act from Schedule I, which again is the worst, to Schedule III, which is a less severe / dangerous drug category. And I believe that's still in the works because laws literally take forever. And as far as I know, weed is actually still classified as a Schedule I. So that might take a while. That would be a long time. I don't know. Someone fact check me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Anyway, nobody seems to know what the heck to do with weed. And the divide is as strong as ever with voices on both sides arguing the dangers of mind-altering substances, the benefits of its therapeutic properties, etc. So now I want to dive into that debate. And again, we're just going to explore facts here based on reputable research and evidence as it stands today, because I'm not making any guesses. I'm not telling you guys anything that hasn't been peer reviewed or published in a medical journal somewhere. So we're pretty much going to leave hemp alone because it's not the same as weed. It doesn't have THC in it. We'll do a bit on CBD at the end, but we are mostly going to talk about marijuana, the kind of cannabis that has THC today, because that is just where the debate is mostly focused. And also that's like what you guys really want to know about in terms of, hey, I smoke weed. Is it bad for my health? In 2024, Gallup reported that 15% of U.S. adults identified as marijuana smokers. In 2021, Cleveland Clinic reported 35% of U.S. adults between 18 and 25 using marijuana within the year. And a lot of research around the internet confirms that it is both A, most prevalent in that younger adult age group, and B, on an upward trend for all U.S. adults, meaning more people are using marijuana every year. I'm so sorry, you guys. My allergies are just like literally kicking me in the butt this week. So if I sound sick, it's because I am, in fact, on my deathbed. Cleveland Clinic confirms that marijuana affects everyone differently based on a bunch of factors, including your genetics, age, and sex, the amount and strength of the marijuana you use, how you consume it, like smoking it versus ingesting it, how long you've used marijuana, underlying medical conditions, a specific product's ingredients, how frequently you use it, and whether you're taking any other medications or substances. Now, I think we all, generally speaking, know that it affects everyone differently, but this list is crazy. And something that I think is important to call out is that there's a bunch of research out there now to confirm that THC potency in cannabis products quadrupled between 1995 and 2022. So speaking to the fact that the amount of marijuana you use affects its impact on you, we are in a time where a lot less marijuana produces a lot more impact, which means it's very important to use with caution. That is, why people say that thing where they're like, start low and go slow. Like, it sounds stupid, but it really speaks to that. It's real. That kind of freaks me out. Anyway, even if you know everything I just said and you think you're prepared for it, the same person can actually feel different effects of the same marijuana in different conditions or instances. So in practice, you can actually never be 100% sure what you're going to feel like after using marijuana of any kind, because there are just so many factors influencing the outcome. If you smoke marijuana, the THC moves very quickly from your lungs to your bloodstream, which carries the THC to your brain and other organs. Technically, you can feel the effects of the THC after smoking it within literally seconds, and it usually hits its peak effects at like 20 to 30 minutes. Guys, I just looked directly at the camera. I don't think I've ever done that in my life. That was so fucking weird. I'm sorry. Okay. Wow, I just pulled myself right out of the fourth wall. When you're eating or otherwise ingesting THC, it usually takes 20-30 minutes to feel it at all, with its peak effects hitting around 2 hours. Of course, all these time estimates depend on how much you use and what kind, as well as all the other factors previously mentioned. The way it works is there's this fatty acid neurotransmitter that naturally occurs in our bodies, and it's called Anandamide. And Anandamide's primary function is to regulate pain and boost your mood. What's so interesting about Anandamide is that it binds to these receptors in your brain that are also the same receptors that THC binds to when it enters your system. They literally fit together like puzzle pieces. Research suggests that Anandamide is actually a key factor in addiction to other intoxicants, and it can also act as a behavioral reinforcer in animal models of drug abuse. So, in layman's terms, Anandamide plays a notable role in your brain becoming addicted to substances. That is important, I think, for the conversation about whether weed is addictive, and we'll touch on that later. Anyway, when THC enters your system, it basically mimics Anandamide and binds to those receptors, which is proven and backed by solid research to cause the following effects. Some positive, honestly, most negative. I gotta be real. We are going to do proven short-term effects first, split into positive, neutral, and negative effects. And then we're going to do proven long-term effects, split into positive, neutral, and negative effects. And then we'll talk about the effects of THC that have much more limited research to support them, but they're kind of works in progress. So let's start with the proven short-term effects of marijuana. Positive short-term effects include euphoria, positive mood changes, relaxation, and in testing, the reduction of nausea in chemo patients. Great. Neutral short-term effects, which can turn positive or negative in certain situations, include altered senses, like seeing colors brighter or smelling scents more intensely, sleepiness or sedation, and increase in appetite. And then the negative short-term effects, unfortunately, are a lot, so please bear with me. Altered sense of time and space, irritability, anxiety, issues with thinking and problem solving, impaired memory, disorientation and confusion, dizziness, issues with coordination, slowed reaction time, I'm literally getting tired just reading this, experiencing a panic attack, fear, anxiety, or distrust, dry mouth, nausea, increased heart rate for up to 3 hours after smoking, immediate respiratory issues, and according to the National Institute of Health, cannabis intoxication can also induce temporary psychotic episodes in some people, especially at high doses and most likely in high doses, and experiencing such an episode may be linked with developing a psychotic disorder later in life. Of course, many of these symptoms, like impaired judgment, motor and cognitive impairment, psychotic episodes, slowed reaction times, etc., those kind of things commonly lead to accidents and injuries. So aside from the negative impact of the substance itself, they can also lead to behaviors that are dangerous for the user as well. Now, before we dive into the long-term effects of marijuana, I want to remind you there is still a ton to be learned, to be researched and studied. But so far, a variety of reputable studies have been conducted, and these are the proven long-term effects of marijuana so far. Positive long-term effect includes, according to the National Library of Medicine, long-term cannabis use can treat chronic pain. It is worth noting that a lot of the reports confirming that do specifically say the effects of marijuana were proven to be modest, meaning that the marijuana only made small improvements in symptoms. So that's kind of a bummer. And same with the nausea and chemo patients. Unfortunately, that is the only studied and proven long-term effect that is backed by multiple reputable sources. Neutral long-term effects, which again can turn positive or negative depending on the context you're in. THC can suppress your immune system and your immune response. The reason this is kind of neutral or like good or bad, depending on who you are, is that if you have a normal immune system, that's a bad thing. You want your immune system to work. But it could be good for people with autoimmune disorders where their immune systems are hyperactive. So I put it in the neutral category. Unfortunately, again, the negative long-term effects are still more common, and they include using marijuana in your youth before your brain is fully developed can have lasting or permanent impact on the way your brain functions in terms of attention, learning, and memory in particular, and it can also cause depression in adolescents. In people who are predisposed to psychiatric conditions, it can cause or worsen schizophrenia and other psychoses, and long-term users are at increased risk of gum disease, increased pain in cases of sickle cell, impaired fertility, particularly in men, and the development of their sperm, and something called cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which is a condition unique to cannabis users, actually, and it's characterized by frequent severe vomiting. And that sounds terrible. Marijuana use is reported to be especially unsafe for people who are pregnant, which, I mean, I think we probably all could have guessed, because it can be very harmful to fetal brain development. It can increase risk of dangerously low birth weight, and it can increase risk of premature birth and stillbirth. And then, of course, I again, you guys, I'm sorry, I know I sound like a narc. This is just like genuine science. There is the part of marijuana where people are actually smoking it. And the danger here is not related as much to the marijuana itself, but to the actual act of smoking. And the risks of that include lung damage, scarring on your blood vessels, bronchitis, stroke, heart disease, vascular disease. Most of those can become severe enough to cause death. And then also something that I think people don't talk about that much is that the smoke from cannabis product also contains many of the same toxins, irritants, and carcinogens as tobacco smoke. But obviously, more research is needed to confirm the full scope of the effects here, since there's a ton of overlap with tobacco smokers and weed smokers, and researchers kind of have trouble separating the effects of each specific product in these cases. Sidebar for a sec, it's Mother's Day season, which personally I celebrate all year round because moms deserve way more than just a day. And I wanted to take a minute today to thank all the moms out there for everything they do for us, especially my mom, because there is no me without you. Function Health just released a book called Long Live Moms as a reminder that moms need to take care of themselves too. I really loved this excerpt from the book, so I'm just going to read you a quick piece of it. Moms know sacrifice, love stitched tight. They toil, the grit, the sleepless nights. They hold the world yet stand unseen, the quiet force in between. The keepers of the scraped up knees, the magic hands that calm the seas. But wise are moms who pause, who see that caring starts with caring for me. A body strong, a breath drawn deep, a heart that beats, a soul to keep. The years move fast, yet love remains, a bond unbroken, thread through veins. So long live the ones who teach us how to love ourselves, to live well now. Long live the hearts, the wisdom, the care. Long live moms everywhere. If you are a mom or have a mother figure in your life, I'm sure this poem resonates. I feel like it's such a powerful reflection of the sacrifices a mother makes and the love and joy they bring into the world. I literally had to record this twice because I got choked up reading it the first time. If you don't know Function Health, it's an all-in-one health platform that helps you take control of your health through data. Instead of guessing what's happening inside your body, Function helps you know for sure, providing access to 100+ advanced lab tests. These tests include insights into thyroid function, hormones, liver health, heart health, autoimmunity, kidney function, nutrient levels, heavy metal toxicity, immune system, electrolytes, and more. With Function, your first set of tests helps establish a baseline of your health, giving you a starting point to compare future tests against. This makes it easy to spot changes, even subtle ones, and address them proactively. For all my moms out there, Function Health is the best way to care for you so you can continue to care for them. Get Function Health's Long Live Moms book for free at functionhealth.com/capslock and learn more about how Function Health can help you take better care of you. That's functionhealth.com/capslock. Now we're going to talk about the short-term and long-term effects that are revealed by a significantly smaller body of work with much more limited evidence. And to be double clear, the following positive and negative effects require a lot more research to confirm. But so far, these smaller studies say marijuana can have the following positive effects. It can improve sleep in people with obstructive sleep apnea, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, or MS. It can increase your appetite and decrease weight loss in people with HIV and AIDS. It can reduce tics in people with Tourette syndrome. That's so interesting to me. It can reduce anxiety in people with social anxiety disorder, improve symptoms of PTSD, and slow the progression of Alzheimer's and dementia. These smaller studies also say marijuana can have the negative effect of causing suicidal thoughts and behaviors among teens and military veterans in the United States. Now, what's important to note here, I think, is that people with mental health disorders are proven to be more likely to use marijuana. And all of the factors that influence your mental health, including like your genes, your trauma, your stress, they also influence your likelihood of using marijuana. So much more longitudinal research is needed here to determine like the long-term relationship between smoking weed and your mental health. And don't forget that with some of the experimental positive effects of marijuana, like reduced anxiety, the PTSD, the reduction in Alzheimer's and dementia symptoms, unfortunately, there's also conflicting evidence out there that says marijuana makes all of those things worse. So obviously take everything with a grain of salt. And like I said, we need a ton more research to like lock that in. Now, I do want to bring up a hot button topic within a hot button topic that weed already is, which is the question of whether it's addictive. And the flat out answer based on the research on the internet so far is yes, it's addictive. Chronic use of marijuana is closely associated with cannabis use disorder, which is basically just the weed version of any substance use disorder. And this is where I think it is so interesting and such an important conversation. It is estimated by the National Institute of Health to affect 22 to 30% of people that use cannabis, which is a ton. For context, CDC published research shows that the prevalence of alcohol use disorder among drinkers is around 1 to 2%. And the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics even more recently estimated a slightly higher rate of around 6% for adults who drink alcohol becoming addicted to it. So being generous, we're comparing 7% of drinkers becoming addicted to alcohol with 30% of smokers becoming addicted to weed. That is more than triple. The American Psychiatric Association defines cannabis use disorder as a pattern of use that leads to clinically significant impairment or distress. This means a person has had 2 or more of the following symptoms in a 12-month period. So if you are worried about the amount you're smoking weed, or you have ever thought before, like, this is starting to affect my life, maybe I should stop, listen to this list of symptoms. And if you have had 2 or more of them in the last 12 months, it is likely that you should consult a doctor for cannabis use disorder. Using cannabis in larger amounts over a longer period of time than was intended. Persistent desire or unsuccessful efforts to cut down or control cannabis use. Spending a lot of time getting, using, or recovering from the effects of cannabis. Craving or a strong desire or urge to use cannabis. Using cannabis even though it causes problems at work, school, or home. Continuing to use cannabis despite social or relationship problems. Giving up important hobbies or activities with friends and family, or in the workplace to use cannabis. Using cannabis in situations with risk of injury. Continued use despite knowing that ongoing physical or psychological problems have been caused or worsened by cannabis. Cannabis tolerance, which is a need for increased amounts of cannabis to achieve the same desired effect. And the last one is withdrawal symptoms after stopping cannabis use. Cannabis use disorder can be diagnosed as mild. That's if you have 2 or 3 of these symptoms. Moderate, which is if you have 4 or 5 symptoms. Or severe, which is if you relate to 6 or more of the symptoms I just listed. And yes, you can experience withdrawal from weed, whether or not you have cannabis use disorder. The National Institute on Drug Abuse referenced a study estimating that over 12% of people who frequently use cannabis experience withdrawal, and symptoms include anger, irritability, aggression, feeling nervous or anxious, restlessness, decreased appetite or weight, depression, insomnia, experiencing strange or unsettling dreams, headaches, sweating, abdominal pain, and tremors. Now, the one good thing here is that while it is possible, it is extremely unlikely to have a fatal overdose on just weed. And if you told me that a really long time ago when I was in high school making deals with God with my head in a toilet bowl, I would have probably felt a lot better about myself. If cannabis contributes to death, it is most likely due to the interaction of cannabis with other things like underlying conditions, heart complications, or other substances. Overdoses are more likely, I will say, when using edibles because dosing is less predictable. They take longer to kick in, making it hard to tell how much you've had, and also often leading people to take more than they intended. And they can be processed a little bit differently by your body. There is no set amount of THC that causes an overdose since, again, everybody reacts differently to weed every time they use it. So now that we have gone through literally everything I can think of at this moment, and I'm basically going cross-eyed from all this researching and writing, I do want to remind you that the government still has weed listed as a Schedule I substance. And as such, the regulation and penalization of marijuana use has been enforced for so long. And I have to believe that that has slowed down both the research on and application of marijuana and THC in a variety of contexts, which of course makes me wonder if maybe the research is a little bit biased since it was halted intermittently at times and may be difficult or expensive to conduct. So there are still technically no accepted medical uses and it is not FDA approved despite having some emerging research to show potential benefits. However, based solely on the research that's currently out there, I'm so far inclined to believe that with marijuana and THC, the juice is just not worth the squeeze, meaning that the proven benefits are far outweighed by the proven risks. And there are other significantly better researched and proven ways to experience the few positive effects of those substances without the dangers. Like reduce your stress with yoga. You probably won't crash your car, you know? That said, at this stage of my research, I am not sure where I stand on the criminalization of the possession and use of marijuana. My primary conflict here is that while I don't feel like weed is necessarily safe all the time, and therefore legalization feels like a pretty gray area, the criminalization of weed has had some pretty distinctly negative effects. Like, it has disproportionately been enforced against marginalized communities. The ACLU reported that Black individuals are more than 3 times as likely to be arrested for cannabis possession than white individuals, despite similar rates of use. That's not cool. It also takes attention and resources away from law enforcement fighting violent crime. It creates an underground market for marijuana where people feel the need to hide their possession and use, leading to really 2 things that I can think of off the top of my head, which is more minors having access to marijuana and also less regulated transactions. And also it, of course, precludes the expansion of a very lucrative industry, which has been proven to positively impact the economy. It creates a lot of jobs. It brings in a lot of money, that stuff. My inclination is that while weed should not be criminalized when used responsibly, it should be regulated at least as much as similar substances and criminalized when used irresponsibly. For example, smoking and driving, possession and use amongst minors, etc. Sort of like alcohol. Like, I also don't really think there's a world in which alcohol should be less regulated than weed, since it's equally, if not more dangerous as a group 1 carcinogen with 0 redeeming qualities. I sound like a broken record, but it is true. That said, I don't think I would actually recommend weed to anyone for really any reason, the same way I wouldn't recommend alcohol to anyone because of how dramatically the cons just seem to outweigh the pros in terms of your short and long-term health and cognitive function. Before we wrap up, I think it's important to differentiate again between marijuana containing THC and CBD, which doesn't contain THC or other psychoactive compounds, because a lot of the health benefits that cannabis can claim actually come from CBD, which doesn't make you high and it doesn't count as medical marijuana. You can consume, inhale, or apply CBD to your skin, and studies show that it has a variety of health benefits, including in 2018, the first FDA-approved drug containing CBD, cannabidiol, in parentheses, the brand name I think is Epidiolex, was released in the market to treat 2 rare kinds of epilepsy. CBD can help treat a range of anxiety disorders, including generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and PTSD. However, it is important to note that this worked best in people with severe anxiety, and some people who only had like mild anxiety actually had worse anxiety after taking CBD. And there is limited research to suggest that CBD can improve sleep duration and quality, as well as chronic pain. It can also lower blood pressure, reduce inflammation, potentially help reduce the likelihood of relapse in alcohol or drug addiction, treat gastrointestinal disorders, and fight against the development and progress of cancer in the human body. Needs a ton more research. I've heard a lot of personal anecdotes from friends who say CBD really helps them. And I've heard a lot of personal anecdotes from friends who say CBD has literally 0 impact on them. But especially if more research comes in to back it up, I so far don't see any harm really in using CBD in normal amounts. I would be particularly careful if you intend on exploring it for reducing the likelihood of relapse and addiction. I'm not sure about that. But I think so far I don't see a ton of harm in using CBD in normal amounts. And I'm going to reserve that conversation for another episode if you guys want it, because this one has been so incredibly long and I'm tired and I have this allergy thing going on and I'm sure you don't want to hear my voice anymore today. So for now, that's that on that. As usual, everything I shared in this episode is based on research from sources that I implicitly trust around the internet, National Library of Medicine, PBS, that kind of stuff. But it is crucial to think critically on your own about your personal situations and health conditions, as well as your own lifestyle and preferences and doctor recommendations, that kind of stuff. Nothing in this podcast is medical advice. I'm not a doctor. You know the drill. This is just information I collected in the pursuit of knowledge, with a sidecar of my opinion at the end, drawn from the research that built this episode. I hope you learned something. I hope you explore the resources in the show notes. I hope this podcast isn't too much of a bummer, since so many of our favorite things are kind of bad for us, except caffeine, right? We can keep the coffee, so that was cool. And I hope to see you guys again next week. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for giving Caps Lock a chance. If you liked this episode, please stick around for more, because we have some really interesting topics on the docket that I'm very excited about, including the relationship between alcohol and ADHD, friend breakups, manifestation, nervous system regulation, hair loss, and so much more. Some will be solo episodes and some will feature scientists, founders, experts, doctors, and other very cool, smart people. If there's a topic you want to hear about on Caps Lock, send me a message. And lastly, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Threads at Life in Caps Lock. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Leave me a rating or review. These are so important to podcasters. And tune in next Sunday at 8 a.m. for another episode of Caps Lock. Okay. Love you. Talk soon.